Hi, everyone, and welcome back. This is Professor Hall. Today we are talking about One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, the book, not the movie. And this is the first lecture in our series, which is a brief summary of the book. The second lecture, we're going to look at the book's place in American literature and the literary movements that influence the author's writing. And then in our third lecture, we'll look at some of the themes and a few features of the book that we want to dig into deeper. So let's get started. Chief BROMDEN. Chief BROMDEN is the narrator of the novel, and he is a patient at an unnamed mental hospital in Oregon. BROMDEN pretends to be deaf and dumb. Today we would say he's selectively mute, choosing not to speak. If you were in one of my other classes, Maya Angelou wrote I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and she talks about how she was selectively mute as well. So this is something that people go through from time to time. In Maya Angelou's case, it was a response to trauma, and I'd like you to kind of watch for the ways that the chief may have been traumatized in his childhood. We get glimpses of it throughout the novel as he recalls things from his past. But the book opens with very graphic language and violent scenes. I find that sometimes people want to stop reading after the first couple pages. If those are triggers for you or they bother you too much, you can kind of skip past them. But it becomes clear from the beginning that BROMDEN may not be a reliable narrator. I'm going to talk more about that in my third lecture, but I would like you to kind of know that going forward. So there are these scenes that are almost kind of fantasy-like in a way, heavy symbolism as he kind of describes what's going on around him with the other, the orderlies we see here in this picture as they give him a broom to clean up the ward because he can move around, but he's not talking and supposedly is deaf. But nevertheless, even though he may suffer from some mental illness, and possibly schizophrenia, although that's never said directly. He describes life in the hospital because he's pretending to be deaf. People say things around him, so he's almost an omniscient narrator because of all that he sees. And he describes life in the hospital. In the beginning of the novel, we see that patients are divided into two groups, the acutes, who stay for a short period of time, and then the chronics, those who may be incurable. Then we meet Nurse RATCHED. Nurse RATCHED is the head of the ward. I love this with the nurse's cap made out of barbed wire and the blood there. Nurse RATCHED is the head of the ward. She has chosen people to work underneath her who are submissive and easily manipulated. She's the antagonist of the novel, and it's clear that she's more concerned with control and power than the health of her patients. So she gives the men medication that sometimes it's clear they might not need it. She encourages them to lie or exaggerate during group therapy sessions to purge themselves of the sinful things that they have done in the past or the horrible deeds that they have to overcome. She has a book also where they can snitch on each other. So someone says, well, one time I looked at somebody in the shower, and somebody else goes and runs down and writes that in the book so that they can talk about it later on. So it's this feeling of paranoia and a way of breaking down the men who are in the ward. This is going to become quite important as well, and I'll talk about my third lecture, but the men really are emasculated and entirely under her control. Although many do not appear to actually suffer from mental illness. For some of them, it's not really clear why they are there. So you have to kind of look for that. It's an important theme in the author's book that we're going to, as I said, dig into later. So we meet the chief and we see the ward through his eyes. There are other wards in this hospital that are described later on. And then we see Nurse RATCHED, who's running things. And then we have our hero, Randle McMurphy. After getting a glimpse of life in the ward, we meet the novel's protagonist. He's kind of an anti-hero. He's come from a work farm where he intentionally started a fight and pretended to be insane so he would be transferred to the ward. So he's not a perfect hero the way many books have a protagonist be a perfect hero. But he has a lot of many flaws, and he's at first delighted to have the chance to have more leisure and more freedom, and in particular better food than he had in jail or at this work farm. He was put there on kind of like a jail work release program because of statutory rape. So he had been with someone who was underage. The other patients are startled at Randle's spirit. He has not been broken by the system the way they've been broken. So he's come in and he's very jolly and loud, and they're not used to that. And it's quite jarring in a way to see this very masculine guy being so energetic and full of life when really the rest of the people in the ward feel beaten down by life and defeated. So, chaos. What ensues is a series of episodes in which McMurphy and Nurse Ratched battle for control of the ward. This is an illustration of this ward. You can see there Randle with his red hair. The demands that McMurphy makes at first are self-serving. He wants to play cards for money. He wants a separate room where these acutes, these people who are not going to be there for a long time, can have more leisure time. Eventually, he kind of comes to see himself as a protector of the other men on the ward, and someone who is fighting for their rights as much as he's fighting for his own rights. So there is a bit of character development there where his motives shift and change the longer he's with these other men. So, for example, he pushes to allow the World Series to play on the ward's TV. He sets up an outing or fishing trip. He engages in a fight with orderlies when they taunt another man in the shower, not really caring at that point if he gets sent to a different ward or not for that behavior. I love, this is a poster from the movie. This is the Polish version of the movie poster. We have these wires here kind of showing the electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, also here known as shock therapy. But if you notice this iconography, he's kind of looking almost like a Christ-like figure. So, chaos that Murphy brings, and then control that Nurse Ratched tries to have. Nurse Ratched manipulates both the men and the staff to control this chaos, to try to return the ward to order. She insinuates things about McMurphy's character, never comes out and says anything straight out. So first she questions whether he's pretending to be mentally ill, then she later insists that he's a psychopath, he's a danger to himself and others, that drastic measures should be taken. She really plays mind games with the patients during the group therapy sessions to try to bend them to her will. And in return, McMurphy really is also manipulating people. They're both master manipulators. But the thing about McMurphy is that eventually he changes, and he is trying to encourage the people to be more free. She's trying to encourage them to be less free and to be more part of this system. So as she increases treatments, including medication, shock therapy treatments that they do not really need, but she's trying to use these to control people. The struggle might seem like a typical kind of man versus man, or here man versus woman conflict, but the two characters really come to symbolize free spirits against a controlling society. I don't want to get into any more of the incidents specifically because I want you to kind of discover those on your own, and I'm not going to give away the ending, but I'll talk about that in another lecture, so we can get into that there. So, read-alikes. If you enjoy this book, The author and his band of so-called merry pranksters. Their story is told in the book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. We're going to talk more about the author Ken Kesey and his life next time. Jack Kerouac on the road. Ken Kesey is one of the beats. Jack Kerouac is also a beat writer, and if you like this book, you might like his book as well. If you really like the theme of an individual versus society and a free spirit who's trying not to be broken down by these the machinery of society, you might enjoy Catcher in the Rye if you haven't read that. If you really like the story of someone in a mental health ward and you want to read a nonfiction, sorry, it's not really nonfiction, but it's sort of semi-autobiographical. Sylvia Plath wrote the book The Bell Jar. It is a novel, but it is somewhat based on her own experiences. And the book Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen is another story of someone who found themselves needing help and went into mental health facilities. So if that is something that kind of interests you, and you're interested in psychology and those aspects of the book, highly recommended. So that's it for this. I hope that you enjoy the book, and next time we're going to talk a little bit more about the author and the literary movements. Thanks.